Well, here's the problem. Your business can be perfectly optimized in every way. It can run like a Swiss clock. But if you don't innovate, your perfectly optimized Swiss clock will run perfectly all the way into the grave. For example, if you run a chain of video rental stores, it doesn't matter how well you run them when Netflix comes along and makes your entire business model redundant. Corporate leaders often look at the new emerging thing, the trend, the technology, with a little bit of disdain because they tend to see it in its infancy. Then what happens is they ignore it, and behind them, in their blind spot, in their absence, the new thing grows up and runs them over. It all starts with creating the right culture. Most companies know that they need to innovate. Some have even hired people to start looking at ways to innovate, whether it's internally or externally. But then what tends to happen is a war breaks out. You have the innovators on the one hand, who are natural radical disruptors, and you have what I like to call the efficiency Hitlers on the other hand. And these are the optimizers of systems. And of course, these two see one another as opposite camps. They end up in a natural war with one another. Radical disruptors versus efficiency Hitlers. And this really is a leadership issue because your company needs both. And the distinction is that you need the efficiency Hitlers to make everything as optimized as possible right up to the point where you abandon it and carry on with the new thing that the innovators have introduced. So what you essentially need is you need the efficiency Hitlers to work in sporadic bursts. They need to optimize, 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 abandon. Optimize, optimize, abandon. But unless they know that, an internal cultural war breaks out. So this is definitely a leadership issue. When I come into a company, that's the first thing that I look at. Leadership needs to understand that these two opposing camps both have to be educated about their seemingly different and opposing but complementary goals. That's a leadership issue. Well, there's no doubt that creating a culture of innovation within a company requires a high tolerance for trial and error and for failure. Innovation is not a systematic process because there is no data available from the future in terms of what will work. There are only clever hypotheses that have to be tested. And that actually, therein lies our clue. That is how managers get around the idea of measuring people and finding metrics that work when you have to tolerate messy failure. So here's what managers need to do. Rather than relying on the results that your people get, test the excellence of their experiments. So in other words, test the excellence of their hypotheses. Are they coming up with clever thought statements about what could be achieved? Then test the excellence of their experiments. How do they go about trying to see if their new product, offering, or innovation will work? And then test the excellence of the knowledge they gain as a result. In other words, after implementing their experiments, what have they learnt? What have they learnt about what does work and what doesn't work? And finally, and this is important, what new information did they gain that they did not expect? That has nothing to do with what worked or didn't. New information that they didn't see coming. And then finally, you test the excellence of what they do with that new information. And that's how you start to create this groundwork. You start to create the pillars that are necessary for innovating within your brand. In my book, Relentlessly Relevant, I provide 50 different ways to innovate, 50 different starting points for thinking about innovation in your brand. And here's an example of just one of them and how practical they are. I use this one quite often with delegates. I say, imagine that your delivery mechanism is taken away from you. So whether that means your building burns down, or your computer crashes, or the physical item you use to service a need is removed from the picture. Now, you still can and must service the existing need, but you're not allowed to replicate any of the old parts. How would you go about it? And what that sort of thinking spurs is different, innovative ways of accomplishing the same thing. And also, it takes us out of our entrenched thinking about how things have always been done and shows us different ways of accomplishing the same goal. Perhaps the greatest value there is not just that it shows us new ways to innovate around our product or business, But it also shows us where the threats lie. Because for a group of people who are not entrenched in our current systems, why would they not be able to use this alternative, potentially better approach to take business away from us? And that's just one of the ways in which I spur people on to think about innovation and to own their industry tomorrow.